All right, AP Environmental Science. We're going to continue today with our topics 8.9 and 8.10, 8.10. And we're going to continue talking about the solid waste and the solid waste stream. So yesterday we kind of talked about some of the issues that we have involving solid waste. We talked about what solid waste is, and we talked about kind of the trends. We're producing more and more solid waste than we ever have, and some of this stuff is really bad for the environment. So we have to find ways to just kind of keep solid waste out of the waste stream. I said yesterday the waste stream was basically, when it leaves your hand and it goes into a dumpster or a trash can, then it enters the waste stream. And where it goes, it could go to several different places. Now, one of the things I think we need to, kind of understand is that there is some solutions to our municipal solid waste problem, our MSW problem, and these solutions center around something called the three R's. And I want you to remember the three R's. All right, reduce, reuse, and recycle. So we're going to talk about how each one of these has an impact on the amount of waste that goes into the waste stream, which is good if we minimize that as much as possible. So the first one we're going to talk about is what we call reducing. Reducing is simply just putting less into the waste stream. Minimizing what goes in. This by far, of the three R's, this is the most environmentally beneficial because, again, if you don't put it into the waste stream, then it's not in the waste stream. So, and what a better way to kind of help solve the problem. So, just we talked about, for example, disposable cups yesterday. I mean, instead of using, a dozen plastic cups, in a week, maybe you can use the same cup, over and over again. I mean, they can be used more than once. I mean, maybe that's just one way that we can, reduce some of the things that we put into the waste stream. Another type of reduction is something called source reduction. Source reduction is done at the manufacturer's end. So instead of the consumer end, where we get these products and we use them, this is more on the manufacturing of the product itself, especially the packaging. And we said yesterday that 31% of what we throw out is just packaging or containers of some type. Here's a really good example here. This is some laundry detergent, right? Tide. This picture on the right, this is kind of showing us the traditional, plastic container that this comes in, and you can still buy those in the stores. But they've actually made kind of a more environmentally friendly packaging. This is mainly made out of paper, so it's more biodegradable, it's more compostable, and it actually weighs 85% less than what the plastic container does. So by throwing out this packaging, you're actually throwing less into the waste stream, and it's probably less toxic than plastic than compared to this container. So, but again, that's done again on the manufacturing side. It's not done on the consumer side. We're going to throw it out regardless. But if we don't have this container to throw out, then we're not going to. So, if the company produces this packaging instead of this one, it's probably better for the environment. Now, one of the issues with that is it may be more expensive for the company to produce this type of packaging, so maybe they're more reluctant to do it. So, that could be a problem. But again, that's on the company's end; it's on the manufacturer's side. Reusing. Reusing things is something that I think we understand. Instead of buying something new, maybe buy something that was used. I mean, nobody really, I guess, really wants to do that. We all like to have new things. But, if we reuse things, like, for example, cell phones, I mean, you can buy refurbished cell phones, you can. They're a little bit less expensive, but usually, the warranties on them are a little bit less. And again, people think of like, oh, it's refurbished, somebody else owned it. Well, I mean, big deal. I mean, it still works. It's still a cell phone, right? Um, reusable grocery bags. There's a lot of grocery stores around the Aldi does this. right? They sell like reusable bags where you can come in, put groceries in it, take it home, take them out, and bring the bag back, and you can put groceries in it again. I mean, they sell these all over the place. Instead of using, the paper bags or the plastic bags that the grocery store sells, over and over again, and just throwing those things in the trash. I mean, here's one thing you could do when you go to the grocery store. You know, um, reuse bags. You'll buy a reusable grocery bag, and that's one thing that you can do. Some grocery stores have even banned plastic bags. If they haven't, you can tell the grocery store clerk to not put them in plastic. Paper, I guess, would be better for the environment if you have to choose. But that would be just one example, again, of something that you can actually do. Getting things repaired when they go bad. Instead of throwing them out, get them fixed. Maybe it's more cost effective, maybe not. Usually it's not, but that's an option. Repurposing things, for example, using newspaper for animal bedding. You can go buy animal bedding in the store, but why not just take a bunch of newspaper, shred it up, and lay that down in your hamster cage or whatever animal it is you have in your house? So, again, reusing things is another way to have less things go into the stream. Recycling. So this is kind of a big one. Let's talk about it because there's different types of recycling. Recycling is basically just collecting, waste and converting it into a newer product. I mean, we always think we're doing really good things when we recycle, and I'm not saying it's a terrible thing, but of the three R's, this one has the potential to cause the most environmental damage because in order to recycle, it requires a tremendous amount of energy. That could come in the form of fossil fuels. For example, all of the garbage trucks or the recycling trucks have to come around, pick up all your recyclable material, and then haul it away. And that all burns fossil fuels. These recycling plants. There's a lot of electricity that's used in those, which requires burning a lot of coal, most likely in the United States. So a lot of energy is used to recycle, much more so than reusing things, for example. Or just reducing things. That doesn't take a lot of energy at all, but recycling definitely does. About 35% of what we throw away can get recycled or gets recycled. If you compare that to other countries around the world, we're kind of behind. Switzerland, for example, recycles 52% of what they throw out. Austria 50%, Germany 48, etc. So I mean, you would think that we're the most developed country in the world, that we would probably be a lot better at figuring out this recycling problem. But we only recycle about 35% of what we throw out. Now, there are a couple different types of recycling. One of them is called closed loop recycling. The other one is called open loop recycling. So let's talk about the differences between those. First of all, closed loop recycling. A great example of it is carpeting. Okay, so let's talk about how this works. So when we make carpeting, we make it using a bunch of chemicals. Usually a bunch of like toxic chemicals like benzene, petroleum-based chemicals, oil-based compounds, and we use those things to make the original carpet fibers, right? Which are used to make the carpeting. Now, when that carpeting goes bad, and you want to rip it out of your house and you want to recycle it, then you just simply take it out and somebody hauls it away. Now, when they recycle that carpet fiber, they don't use more chemicals. They just recycle it. It's the same material. So this loop here just kind of goes over and over again. Okay, but they only use the chemicals when they originally manufacture the carpet fibers. They don't use them during the recycling process. So I guess that's kind of a good thing about closed loop recycling is the chemicals are typically only used at one point during the life of those carpet fibers. Aluminum is very similar to this. Paper recycling is very similar to this. When you recycle those things, we don't, use more chemicals to recycle them. If that makes sense. Now, the other type of recycling is called open loop. Plastic bottles are a really good example of open loop recycling. So I want you to think about this. the next time you recycle a plastic bottle. Okay, those plastic bottles are made using chemicals. Again, a lot of the same chemicals that are used to make carpet fibers, but we use these things to make plastic bottles in this case. We use those bottles, typically for a very short period of time, right? And then we put them in a recycling bin, maybe, unless we put them in the garbage or something. And so they're going to be either hauled off to a landfill somewhere, or they're going to be recycled, right? It's usually one of two places where those plastic bottles end up. Now, if they get recycled, most of the time, plastic doesn't get recycled into more plastic bottles. Sometimes it does, but a lot of times it doesn't. A lot of times, those plastics are actually broken down and they're used to produce other products. So, for example, in this picture here, they're taking those broken down plastics and they're producing clothing like jackets and sweatshirts and stuff out of them. Now, the thing is, to manufacture those clothes, we need more chemicals. So you'll notice here that chemicals are used to make the original product, and then we also use chemicals to make the new product. So there's two different inputs, in this case, of most likely toxic chemicals going into consumer products that could eventually end up in a landfill anyway. All right, so open and close. I mean, plastic bottles, guys, I'm telling you, the best thing to do is just not use them at all. If there's anything that you can cut back on when it comes to your MSW, it's any type of plastic container. Again, probably the most common thing that we use are those plastic bottles. Use tap water if possible, or reuse a container to drink liquids out of. It'd be much better for the environment. So just a few things about recycling here, just to kind of make sure we understand, like, things that get recycled, things that don't. And these are typically things that we do recycle: glass bottles, newspapers, cans, plastic bottles. Hopefully, or they get recycled into other plastic bottles, not other things. Cardboard, I guess, a type of paper, I suppose. Office paper, all these things. Um, every ton of recycled paper saves 17 trees. So, every single week, we have kids that walk around the school, they pick up our paper containers. They're actually doing a really good thing for the environment. That also saves 7,000 gallons of water, by doing that, 4,100 kilowatt hours of energy. So we're not burning as much coal, for example, and it saves space when it comes to landfills. That we remember, we only have so much land on this planet. 50% of the aluminum that we use does get recycled in the U.S., which is, you would think, is not a bad statistic. However, the world average is 70%. So we're not recycling nearly as much aluminum as we probably should. Remember, aluminum is a finite resource; it's a non-renewable thing. Paper, again, the U.S. recycles about 50% of our paper. Denmark recycles 97%. So why is Denmark recycling so much more than we are? I don't know. We're the leaders of the developed world. We should probably be on par with Denmark, I would think. Now, when it comes to our recycling and how it gets done, there's typically two different ways that we recycle. One way is what we call source separation. Now, some communities actually do this, where they have multiple containers, and each container has a different type of MSW. It has a different type of recyclable material. Um, by doing this, I think one of the issues with it is it does take a concerted effort, by the consumer. I mean, consumers have to be conscious to separate their trash. So when they, for example, drink a plastic bottle, make sure it goes into the plastic container and not the metal or the glass container. By doing this, it actually can be a cheaper process because we're depending on the consumer to do their separation. We're not depending on the company or the garbage trucks or whoever it is that's coming to pick up the stuff to do the separation for us. So I mean, the fact that it relies on the consumers, I think that's a. I mean, I think that if we did it, I think that would be a much better thing. The problem is not everybody does it. Most people are just like, I don't feel like separating my trash out into 5 different containers. So if they do that, that could be an issue. Now the other thing, and this is what most communities are doing. In fact, this is pretty much what we do in Crown Point. We have like for example in my garage, I've got 2 dumpsters. Right, one of them is green and one of them has a yellow lid on it. The yellow lid is all your recyclables. So you put your paper in it, you put your metals in it, your plastic, you put everything in this can. And they come by and they pick up that can. Right? Now, what do they do with all that? They throw it in a recyclable truck or recycling truck. They carry it away to a facility and workers actually separate it out. So instead of the consumer separating it, then it's the company, it's the not manufacturers, but it's the facility that actually does this. So I guess one good thing about that is it does create jobs. I mean, there are people that will work in order to do that. In fact, some of those jobs are fairly high paying. Like working in a recycling factory actually can pay pretty good money. People who like garbage men. I mean, they make pretty good money actually. Probably make I don't know, probably about as much money as I do. So maybe it's not that bad of a job. Um, but these things can be expensive to operate. They can produce air. I mean, any garbage facility can produce air pollution. Um, and the other thing too is that it just kind of removes the responsibility from the customer. I mean, I think if you look at this picture on the left, I mean, I think this would be a really responsible citizen, by putting all of their um, recyclable materials in separate bins, much more than let's say throwing it all in one container. But I guess any recycling is better than nothing, I suppose. So make sure we know source separation versus what we call a materials recovery facility. This is what we call a single stream operation. All right, now finally today I want to talk a little bit about composting. Composting is basically all of our organic material, grass clippings, food, paper could be an organic material that could compost. These are things that can naturally break down. Okay. Now, when we put these things into a landfill, we let's say we throw them in the trash and they get hauled away to a landfill. When they get put into a hole in the ground and covered up, okay, what happens is all of that decomposition is happening without any oxygen gas because there's no oxygen gas underground if you seal it off, right? That's what we do with landfills. We seal them off. We'll talk more about those a little bit later this week. But that's what we call anaerobic decomposition. It's decomposition that's happening without any oxygen. When that happens, the bacteria that do the decomposition, they produce methane gas. Like if you've ever driven by a landfill, there's some up in Chicago on the south side of Chicago. As you're driving into the city, if you roll the windows down in the summer, you can smell that methane gas that's being produced by those landfills. There's like those rolling hills. Like if you look out your window, those are actually landfills. They're not like mountains or anything. But greenhouse or methane gas, remember, is a greenhouse gas. So, like, we don't want our landfills producing a bunch of methane, but when we throw a bunch of organic compounds or a bunch of organic products in it, then eventually they do produce that methane gas. Now, the term compost means that we can take all of this compostable material and we can allow it to decompose in the open air so that it doesn't um, produce methane gas. I mean, if we provide oxygen gas for the bacteria, then eventually they can break down all this organic matter, and they can do it again under the presence of oxygen condition or oxygenated conditions, and that way it won't produce this dangerous gas. So by doing that, we can actually generate what we call humus. Right, humus is organic material that we can actually use to fertilize with. So we're taking, again, basically just like food scraps and things like this, and we're turning them into almost like a fertilizer type of material. Now, some good materials to compost, again, are basically organic things, things that contain carbon, leaf litter, grass clippings, vegetable products, animal manure, paper products, eggshells, orange peels. These are all fairly good materials to compost. Bad materials to compost are anything that's really not organic, metals, plastics, those types of things, or any types of foods that will rot quickly and smell. Like you don't want to throw, a piece of cheese, into your compost pile, or some hamburger meat. That stuff will start to smell fairly quickly. But the thing about composting is it can be done on a small scale. Like some people have little compost piles in their yards, or it can be done on a much larger scale. There are like citywide composting programs where they have huge composting dumps. The good things about composting, again, it will reduce volume in landfills. If we're not putting it in landfills, then it'll reduce the volume. Um, Again, if we do put our compostable material in landfills, then it will decompose anaerobically, again without oxygen. That will produce methane. So we don't want to put our compostable material into landfills. All right, and if we're doing it at our homes, then we're not doing that. So that's a good thing. Again, it produces humus, which again is a fertilizer type of material. It can be used to enhance soil texture, reduce moisture, or retain moisture in soils. It's really good for soils. And the thing is, anybody can compost. It's not really that difficult to do. This picture here is just a little wooden box where someone is composting, probably in their backyard. And when they compost, they can actually sell that humus to a local farm or to the community and actually make a profit out of it if they choose to do that. Um, some cons about composting is, again, it does require a commitment. It takes time, it takes up space depending on how large your composting pile is. It can be troublesome. If you don't know what you're doing. In order to have a proper composting pile, you have to make sure that you kind of follow some rules. For example, there has to be a certain carbon to nitrogen ratio in your composting pile. There has to be moisture, so you have to add water to it. You have to agitate it and aerate it occasionally to get oxygen in there. So you have to kind of like turn it over a lot. And if it's not maintained properly, then it's going to stink and it's going to attract probably pests, insects and rats. But if you do it right, it'll break down fairly quickly. So I know some communities don't allow composting because of the potential that it could smell and attract pests. I know I live in Lakes of the Four Seasons, and there's a covenant that says that we can't do it. Like they will not let us compost, unless you get like a permit or something from somebody, I think. But I don't know. I mean, people that live in rural areas, like on farms, this is probably a really easy thing to do because you can set your composting pile up, far away from your house where it may not smell that bad. But again, you have to maintain it properly. All right, guys. So that's it for the notes for today. I will see you guys on Thursday. Take care. Have a good day.